Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you for watching. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Philosophy Clips. In this philosophy clip, I'd like to discuss Peter Singer's solution to world poverty. If you're interested in reading some of the Singer, you can check out an aptly titled piece he has posted online titled The Singer Solution to World Poverty. Alternatively, you could track down from Amazon or elsewhere The Life You Can Save, or you could go to the website named after the book, thelifeyoucansave.org. Now, before diving into Singer's solution, I want to say a couple things about the kind of poverty that is at issue here, and it's extreme poverty. So the World Bank, www.worldbank.org if you're interested, has recently noted that 750 million human beings on our planet are currently extremely impoverished. They estimate that there's over 1 billion people on our planet that are impoverished, but the most extreme, the most devastating kind of poverty is extreme poverty. So what is extreme poverty? Let's define extreme poverty in the following way. One is extremely impoverished, right, if one lacks the resources to meet their basic needs. So let me say that again. One is extremely impoverished if one lacks the resources to meet their basic needs. And we can understand one here referring either to individuals or to families. Now, there's quite a bit of poverty, of course, on our planet. The extreme kind seems to be the most morally pressing. But there's another kind of poverty, it's relative poverty, and we can understand it in terms of extreme poverty. So we can define relative poverty as being impoverished, but not extremely so. So the kind of poverty that you see here in the US and other developed countries is going to be relative because people in our communities have access to the basic goods. They have access to the resources that can keep them alive, to food, to water, to shelter, and to clothing. Now, of course, there may be some that in rare cases don't have access to these resources, but by and large, in the US and other developed countries, there are safety nets in place that prevent people from going extremely impoverished. So extreme poverty is dominant, or where we find the highest concentrations, more accurately, of extreme poverty, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. But there are other places in the world, of course, that have it. So Singer's interested in his solution in dealing with this really morally pressing kind of poverty, extreme poverty. Of course, relative poverty is an important moral issue, but Singer, in his works, and in this video clip, we're interested only in the extreme version. And keep in mind, I've used the expression morally several times now, or the term morally several times now. That's the relevant kind of solution that Singer's offering. He's offering a moral solution as opposed to, for example, a legal solution, which may force people to deal with the problem. A moral solution doesn't force. It claims that one has certain moral obligations, one has moral responsibility, but that's different from saying that one is legally forced to do it, meaning that if they weren't to do it, or if they didn't do it, then they could be fined, otherwise punished, perhaps put in jail, these kinds of things. So Singer's solution isn't to be understood as a coercive solution. It's a solution that, when thinking about things morally, it seems like we should help those who are extremely impoverished. So we need to get at his solution. Now, Singer thinks it's pretty straightforward how it is that we could establish that we have obligations to those who are extremely impoverished, just generally, without laying out what the scope of that obligation is, meaning without working out how much we have to give to those who are absolutely or extremely impoverished. In the literature, sometimes you'll see philosophers use the expression absolute poverty, but absolute poverty, extreme poverty, they mean the same thing. Two terms for the same phenomenon. So when thinking about our moral obligations to the extremely impoverished, Singer, he has us think about a very simple case. We can call it the pond case. And it happens early on, page 3 of The Life You Can Save. If you have that text available to you, you could read the entire case. But the gist of it is this. Just like imagine you're on your way to work and you've got some new shoes on, you've got a new suit, new clothing on that you spent a decent amount of money on, and you see that there's a small child, drowning in a small pool of water. Lo and behold, you're the only one around to help. Do you have an obligation to help in this situation? And it seems pretty obvious, according to Singer, that of course you do. The thought here is you may end up having to sacrifice a couple $100, given the cost of your new clothes, your new shoes, in order to help save someone who's drowning, a small child in this case who's drowning. This means that we can have, if our intuitions are right, of course, obligations to strangers, obligations to those whose lives are in danger. And what Singer wants to argue is that there's no moral difference between having the obligation to save this child that's drowning in the pool of water and having obligations to save those who are extremely impoverished. It's not going to be a moral difference that the people are further away. We could donate, as it were, to reliable charity organizations. He mentions in places UNICEF and Oxfam, which have been heavily vetted, and they can provide the nearness that's needed, the same kind of nearness that we find in the pond case. So anyways, Singer takes this to be a pretty straightforward argument for the claim that we have obligations to those who are extremely impoverished. But he wants his solution to be stronger. He wants his solution to ultimately establish that what we're obligated to do, morally speaking, is give up all but our basic needs. We need to give up all of our luxuries to help save those who are extremely impoverished. So how does he arrive at this? Well, he gives us a famous case, the Bob case, or Bob and Bugatti case. We'll call it the Bob case for short. And then an argument is generated from it. Just as we have the pond case, there's a pond argument that we can generate from it. The very same thing is going to happen with respect to thinking about the Bob case and the Bob argument that follows from it. And keep in mind that the Bob argument attempts to establish this robust conclusion that we are morally obligated to save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible. And the way that that gets practically worked out is we're obligated to give everything but our own basic needs, that is, all of our luxuries, right, to saving those who are extremely impoverished. And that's a radical conclusion, it seems. So what's the Bob case that's supposed to generate the argument for this claim, for this conclusion? Well, Bob, he purchased a Bugatti. He's of retirement age. It's basically his life savings has gone into purchasing this Bugatti, which he's going to enjoy for a time. Bob studied the markets, perhaps. He realizes keep it for a little while and then make a killing on it once he trades it in. One day he takes it for a ride and he parks it by a railway where trains run frequently. Well, one day there's a train that's unpersoned. It's a runaway, unpersoned train. And it turns out that there's a child on the tracks that's about to get smashed and killed by this unpersoned runaway train. Bob can't do anything to get the child's attention through his voice, but there's a switch built into the case. And Bob has access to the switch, easy access to the switch, reliable access to the switch. All he has to do is flip the switch and the child will be saved. But there's a major cost here. His Bugatti will be destroyed. Remember, the Bugatti's uninsured, so in that way he's screwed. And so if he does save the life of the child on the tracks, then he's going to lose his Bugatti. Question. Moral question. What should Bob do? And the vast majority of people, Singer argues, reasonably so, claim that what Bob should do is flip the switch, saving the child on the tracks and destroying his Bugatti. The initial explanation is pretty straightforward, isn't it? The life of the child on the tracks has more value than the Bugatti has. The Bugatti is, however cool, it is still an inanimate object, finite value. The life of the child certainly goes far beyond that, if it's quantifiable even. So that's the Bob case and generates the Bob argument. Here's a way of running the Bob argument in terms of premises and conclusions. So the first premise would be Bob's behavior is morally wrong, supposing Bob doesn't flip the switch. So in other places, Singer does tell us that, let's imagine that Bob doesn't flip the switch. So let's just suppose that for argument's sake. Bob's behavior is morally wrong, and it doesn't seem like it's even close. So it's not like it's like white lie, let's stave off embarrassment because I did something silly type morally wrong. It's this, we got serious moral wrongness here. That's step one. Step two, if Bob's behavior is morally wrong, it's not even close, then so is the behavior of those who don't save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible. So that's going to be the key premise, doesn't it seem? So it's going to connect Bob's inaction, you could say, with the inaction of those towards the extremely impoverished. And so then from the first two premises, we can get the conclusion: the behavior of those who don't save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible is morally wrong. And then from there, it's just a short hop, skip, and a jump to the conclusion that we're morally obligated to save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible. That's the argument that we get from thinking about the Bob case. So the key questions that you may have now here involve that key second premise. What is it that connects the verdict of the Bob case with the verdict of the case of the extremely impoverished? And what, if any, principles in place to support that connection? Have no fear, says Singer. He does have a principle in place, and let's see if we can understand it. So the principle is, we can call it GMEP, G-M-E-P, GMEP for short. It stands for the greater moral evil principle, the greater moral evil principle. And according to that principle, if one can prevent something bad or evil just means bad here, from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance, then one ought to do it. Well, it looks like we could explain the wrongness of Bob's behavior, so that first premise, by appealing to GMEP, can't we? Bob could readily prevent something bad from happening. All he has to do is sacrifice something of lesser value that doesn't have comparable value, his Bugatti, right? And in doing so, you can prevent the bad thing from happening, namely the child from dying. Therefore, it seems like GMEP predicts that he ought to, all things being equal, flip the switch and save the child on the tracks and allow his Bugatti to be destroyed. So that's just applying GMEP to the first premise. So again, just make sure we're totally clear here. GMEP. Okay, if one can prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance, then one ought to do it. And that principle seems to apply pretty nicely, doesn't it, to that first premise. Get to the second premise. What Singer is going to say is GMEP applies equally to Bob as it does to us. We can prevent something bad from happening. We can prevent the absolutely impoverished from dying, or the extremely impoverished from dying. And we can do so without having to sacrifice anything of comparable moral significance. What must we surrender in order to save the extremely impoverished? Singer is going to say in every case it's just going to be luxuries. It's not going to be what we need to survive. It's just going to be luxuries. So in every instance it's going to be luxuries versus human life, luxuries versus human life, luxuries versus human life. And so GMEP is going to apply equally to Bob as it does to us, and that's the crucial support for that second premise. Of course, that premise again, if Bob's behavior is morally wrong, if his inaction is morally wrong, then so is the behavior, so is the inaction of those who don't save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible. And of course, the conclusion drops down from 1 and 2. For those of you who like the logic and want to understand the logic here, it's just a straightforward, what we call modus ponens inference. We move from P, if P, then Q, to Q. If you have interest in the logic here and you want to look it up, modus ponens, 2 words, modus ponens. It's a logical rule of inference that I'm using here to run the argument, to keep things as clear as possible. If the logic doesn't interest you very much, don't worry about it. And then obviously if our behavior is morally wrong by not saving as many extremely impoverished lives as possible, then it follows, right, doesn't it? Straightforwardly, that we're morally obligated to save as many extremely impoverished lives as possible. So if it's wrong to do X, then you're obligated to do not X. That's a straightforward, logical principle. So we call it, ethical principle, or the ethics of logic principle, I can put it that way. We call it deontic logic if you're interested. Okay, so hopefully we understand Singer's argument. As you can imagine, the strength of that conclusion has led many philosophers to claim there's got to be something wrong with one of the premises. I'll stop here, though, because I think the argument's clear. If you wanted to look at a range of challenges to Singer's argument, he develops many in here, 8 or so, and shows that each of the objections fails. Likewise, in the Singer solution to world poverty piece, he recognizes that people are going to take exception to his argument. He anticipates what their challenges are and maintains that the objections fail. Now I'm going to stop here with this video. I thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Leave a message below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.